Mm. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are back with another Just YA author talk. And the idea is to bring the living authors that contributed to this open access resource to you and talk a little bit about the pieces that they contributed and hear them read. This is like the beautiful part of it all. We're here today with Darius Phelps, and so welcome, Darius.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So just start by introducing yourself and a little bit about your background and where you are in the world.
Okay, I am zooming in from New York, Lower Manhattan. I'm a Teachers College PhD candidate, so the final stretches of the PhD program, and also assistant director at NYU. So wear many hats, but poetry is how I really get my emotions out, take care of myself, and really, most importantly, center myself. So I'm very honored to have some work in this collection.
Wonderful. Can you say just a little bit about your poetry writing journey, like how you
Yeah,
came to poetry?
absolutely. I think it's been a little bit of a whirlwind journey itself. I really started seriously writing poetry, I would say, in middle school, but I know the struggle for that for me was really not having a particular poet or any mentor text that I really could identify with. I loved Edgar Allan Poe, but I was also like, this doesn't feel like me. I also didn't see poets that looked like me write and submit. Well, unknowingly knowing that it just wasn't in classroom curricula, which I think is a big issue that we still face to this day, especially the importance of teaching living poets. So when I moved to New York during the pandemic, I really seriously started looking for like a poetry space and really find like a poetry mentor. And I was very fortunate to connect with a nonprofit called Brooklyn Poets, and I worked there for about 2 years. And I met some of my closest friends and family, like Kyle Yang and Ari Villanueva, who's kind of like taking me under his wing and kind of helped me with poetry in a sense. So that's been my poetry journey. It's been a little bit of hit or miss, but I know for me, I've lost a good bit of family members over the last decade, and poetry's kind of really helped me work through my grief.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll see some of that in the poems that you shared.
Mhm.
And then I know you have some background as an educator also. Do you mind
Yes.
sharing a little bit about your teaching experience in
Yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I tend to forget about that. I taught elementary school for about 13 years. I was very fortunate to start teaching right straight into college at 18, and I taught all grades except for third. I taught fourth and fifth for about the last 5 to 6 years and just absolutely loved that. And now I'm in higher education looking to train in-service and pre-service teachers to do the work that we're doing and let them know that they can do the work like this, especially teachers can be writers in their own classroom as well. And it's an excavation liberatory practice that can be used.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that
Of course.
background because I feel like our teachers like that connection between the
Hmm.
there are like authors in this book who are also teachers, and it's kind of like our lifespan as teachers. Like
Hmm.
we kind of have phases of writing and phases of teaching, and
Hmm.
all the different things that you're sort of doing to keep your teaching life alive in
Right.
different phases. I don't
Hmm.
think sometimes I feel like teachers don't know that there are options for them, if they want to take a
Hmm.
break from the classroom or they feel like they need to spread their wings in another way. They don't always know that there are other phases of a teaching life. And you're like really working toward that with your doctorate and teaching teachers and
Hmm.
all of that. So if you want to learn more about that, I think everyone should follow you definitely on social.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my Twitter handle or X is what it's called now. Sorry, I still refer to it as Twitter is D Phelps, DPHELPS, 1113, and I'm on Instagram at Mr. D Phelps, and that's all lowercase.
Thanks. And I'll put that in the comments also below.
Okay. All right.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the pieces that you shared in Just
Okay.
One Day. So you have three different poems in here, which
Hmm.
are beautiful, and today you're going to read one of them.
Hmm.
So can you tell us which one you're going to read and a little bit
Yes.
of inspiration behind that particular piece?
Okay. Yeah, I think out of three, I'm going to read Psalms of My Broken Heart. And this is kind of written as a reflective piece of really dealing with grief and trauma and the growth process. I feel like a lot of times when we hear grief, it's all about the mourning, but what about the growth process as you mourn and really when you reach a point of celebration, you look back at the loss of a loved one and you focus on the good times, the memories, and what it brought you, but the journey as well. This is kind of a conversation piece between myself and my inner child, really realizing that grief kind of, in a sense, losing my grandfather, to be specific, brought me back to my inner child. And that kind of sparked my love of art again and poetry because I was dealing with grief and I went back to knowing the first coping mechanism that I ever resonated with. And so this is kind of a conversation piece between me and my inner child and really telling him it's going to be okay.
All right, let's hear you read it.
Okay. And this is Psalms of My Broken Heart. I open the windows to the Psalms of my broken heart, knowing that my grief embedded words won't resonate with many. But there is something about the sweet release of my bated breath, fogging up the view of what lies ahead, as the lingering summer rain trickles down, reminding me that pain, this pain, is only temporary, crying out from the Psalms of my broken heart. He stares at me in amazement, wondering how these scars have molded me into the man that reaches with the outstretched hand. I found myself buried in these trauma bond trenches. I know now that this grief garden is where I belong. This is where the rebirth starts.
Thank you, Darius. As you read that again for us,
Mm.
or read that for us, which is probably a rereading for you as you crafted it and read it in other places. What stands out to you when you revisit the poem?
It's been a while. I was thinking too as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh wow, I'm a little rusty. It's been a while since I've read my work out loud. For me, it's really just thinking about the writing process and where I was in my life. This poem is about a year old, really thinking too, and I just reached a 10-year anniversary of my grandfather passing in 2023. And so that's when I was kind of really writing more about that and really thinking, a decade. And you think decades, and normally with life, it's like, oh, celebratory. And so I was thinking too, what really sparked the change in me. It was like looking back at the past and thinking about the good times and the memories. And really, truly, the garden line sticks out to me as well because he was a gardener. So I was like
Mhm.
really take me back to my old childhood home and like looking back and like, oh, this is where it starts. It's really looking back at yourself and really focusing on that reflective piece.
Yeah. Well, I think like the background to the story, to the writing the poem and the timeliness of it,
Mhm,
is really important for us understanding you as a writer.
mhm,
But I also think like, I read this and really thought about this a lot, your poem a lot before ever knowing the backstory to it. So I think like
mhm,
we can make meaning in the poem and find the lines beautiful as they are for us. And for me also the grief garden, like
mhm,
in the trauma bond trenches,
mhm,
and this grief garden is where I belong. When I read those, they mean different things for me and in my
mhm,
grief. And then the images of the garden and thinking about your grandfather as a gardener also
mhm,
brings to light the references, the allusions that are personal to
mhm,
you,
mhm,
beautiful to me, metaphoric to me in a different way. And I think unpacking that a little bit as a teacher and the reader is like a really valuable piece when I'm reading this as well. And I'm also
mhm,
thinking about offering this as a mentor text for inviting students to write to a younger
mhm,
self, and that
mhm,
comforting
right.
that you can do in the poem.
Mhm,
Um, how I'm wondering about a couple of the other pieces that you shared and how
mhm,
you chose what to contribute, knowing this would be going to like, sixth through 12th grade
mhm.
teachers and eventually, hopefully, landing in the hands of students. How did you choose these?
It was a tough decision. I had a lot of work. I was like, because you have such a variety of different sections and topics that we could have submitted to. And I was thinking really just I try to always reflect back on myself, and I'm just like, well, when I was in middle school in that age range, what was the work that I needed at a certain time? And that's a certain time in a kid's life where emotions are heightened, they're going through so much, and really thinking these kids in this generation with the pandemic and what have you, and what's going on in the world, have experienced things that a lot of us just, to be Latin wouldn't be able to handle, at our ages back during that time if roles were reversed. And I was like, "Well, what poems would I have needed that would have spoke to me and helped and find some sense of comfort? Whether that be knowing that I can identify with the pain and the ache that the author feels, or I can identify with the story, like with the other poem, things just don't work like they used to. That was me kind of really thinking back too of just what if you're someone in this age who is used to doing things one way, and there's so many things that are changing with AI and technology. Um, what does that feel like? And you hear all these great things, but it's also like things are changing. There's always someone on the opposite end who is having something taken away from them. And I was like, well, just sharing those pivotal points. So I really had to sit down, like narrow it down. It's like, which are the strongest pieces and what pieces do I feel are needed out in the world right now?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I have like having the different sections. So the book has a love, land, world, future, and being
Hmm.
section. And as we were curating the different fiction pieces, nonfiction pieces, poems, um, it seemed like I was really thought that we would have a lot more in the sort of the futures and thinking about
Mm,
technology and science and imagining just like more just ways of being, but also the parts that might feel unjust, as well that were
right.
sort of surfacing. And so I was so glad to have you contribute this other poem
Hmm.
that really nicely into that piece, along with some of the others that are in that section to think about change. And I think
Yes.
technology is innovation and future, but there's also, as we're changing things, we
Hmm.
are also losing again. So there's the grief comes back in, and I noticed the
Yeah.
grief is kind of present through each of your poems as we're
Hmm.
thinking about what's lost, but what's gained as we're sort of
Hmm.
reimagining who we are and who we're going to become without these
Hmm.
other things and people in our lives, right?
Right, and that's what led me to also the other piece, Wounded Healer. It's rooted. It reminds me a lot of the work that Dr. Yolanda Seeley-Reese does with racial literacy, and she talks about being a wounded healer and really looking at yourself and looking at those wounds and knowing that you're going to be okay, but seeing what is the lesson that's being taught because it is a give and take. It's the equivalent exchange. It's the part of life. It's really having that honesty piece, but that reflective piece as well. So I try to really show like a journey. And you can see that too with the form and like the blank space, how to really navigate. Because one thing I've been trying to do with my writing lately too is how does this emotion look on the page?
Yeah, I'm gonna hold up the book. These are all on the Just YA open access, so they're all free for
Mm,
teachers. And I think there's something about hearing you read it. I mean, I love just hearing you read. I love being with you live because, as a embodied people, that page in 3D. But there's also something about seeing how it lives on the page
mhm.
too, and why that matters. And so I think that
Right.
other piece that we don't often, or I didn't really consider a lot when I was in school about how it looks on the page. I just thought, oh, we
Right.
just enter the poem and we do stanzas,
Hmm.
but not being able to move them. And maybe that is an affordance of technology, being able to space things out.
Right.
I was also able to do that in a notebook. So, those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Well, thank you so much for sharing that piece.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear about your writing life and other things that are
Okay.
happening right now. I know you're working on your dissertation and finishing your
Mhm.
doctorate degree. What kind of other projects or books or things that are in your life right now? I know you have a
I
lot.
was. I do. I do. I was actually just in a book. I actually have it right here. Um, three poems were featured, but it's all about Black girl love and education. Bell
Mm,
Hooks and Pedagogies of Love was released around the 25-year anniversary of All About Love. With Bell Hooks, I have a chapter in here that is called "A Place Where Souls Can Rest: Black
mm,
Girl Freedom, Liberation, and Emancipation," and I co-authored that with my mentor, Dr. Marcel Mentor. So that's out in the world, and I just had a piece come out last week. This talks about the grief garden actually, and it's emancipation the narratives of our mothers, and talks about really grief, losing my grandmother, and having a mother that struggles with clinical depression, and how
mm,
that's affected my life too.
mm. Thanks for that work. Yeah, I think we sometimes forget that the authors that we read or that we
Hmm.
love and follow have additional pieces. Also, like if we just see a poem in a textbook or something, we're not always wondering
Hmm.
like, what else are they doing or what else are they
Right.
thinking about? So thanks for sharing that and to see how your poem lives in different forms, like as a chapter or as a reflective piece. And those are different kinds of writing that I think we can encourage our students to do too. If they can see some mentor text, maybe it's not written for students, but I think it's helpful for teachers to think they could write poetry, they could write chapters in books, they can work on dissertations and keep their writing life alive in a lot of different ways. And it sounds like you're collaborating with different people too, which sounds wonderful.
Yes, and I think, writing is a form of intimacy. So, collaborating is really like that conversational piece. Like, we're talking now about grief and writing and our teaching backgrounds. It's important to really collaborate and have someone where you can have that true brave and safe space to bounce ideas off of, because you don't know where that could take you.
Great. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I appreciate that. The intimacy seems like a lovely way of thinking about being with others and being alongside
Hmm.
others,
Hmm.
and the
It's
trust.
a
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause yeah, absolutely that, the trust, community, and the conversational piece too. You never know who else can identify with the work that you're doing and how seeing each other and looking at each other's wounds and realizing we have something in common and seeing where that can take you on the journey.
Thank you. I think there's so much that needs to be talked about that, where sometimes as teachers we turn away from the pain of
Mm,
our own pain, or the pain of our students, or maybe not think or know how to like welcome or share those spaces with other people who might be hurting,
right.
and um, and knowing how to do that. I don't have answers to that, but it sounds like your
Mhm.
work is exploring that and
Yeah,
offering some
absolutely.
possibilities. So I look forward to reading those chapters.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, we were all just, I think as teachers, we're naturally caregivers and we're selfless people. But I think if we learn to really hone in on our vulnerability as our superpower, it can really change the lives of our students. I think really one of the pivotal points in my journey as educator was sharing my poems with my students and letting them see what I was feeling and hear the pain in my voice, but also showing how it's brought me healing and joy as well. And I think that opens up that another conversation, but it cultivates a true brave space in the classroom.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much. Well, we are nearing the end of our conversation here, and I wonder if there's just any final thoughts or key messages you'd like to leave the audience with.
Oh, no, just thanks to you again for, doing this amazing work and always believing in my work and the opportunity to submit and be featured in this anthology. And just encourage all teachers to grab this resource. It's so many different things that you can take away and use in different snippets and segments of the whole anthology itself. And just really just keep showing up and showing out in the classroom. I know it's definitely not easy being a teacher, but know that it's so necessary and that you are doing the work. And my advice to always let your heart lead the way.
Mm, I love it. Thank you so much. We're going to end there, and I'm just going to encourage everyone and remind people that the book is available as an open education
Mhm.
resource, so it's completely free to teachers to print, download, share without fear of violating any sort of copyright. We just want to make sure the poems and the stories and this wonderful living author that we have here finds his way into the hearts and minds of your students. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here
Yeah,
with us, Darius.
thanks for having me.